feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Sorry, Toto. You've just entered the Mad Pastors Podcast. Honest pastors, honest conversations. Powered by G6 Allies, because everyone needs an ally.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Mad Pastors Podcast.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
This is a video podcast or audio, depending on where you're listening to it. Really, any video can be an audio if you just don't have a picture. So
we are whatever you need.
Yeah, that's true. So I've got the rumbly, just coming off of a head cold voice, so you'll have to bear with me on that. It was nasty. My wife's had it. My wife's getting ready to have a baby, and I'm pretty sure she's getting all of her sickness out before she has the baby, so that she has super endurance after the baby.
That's good.
But
she's gonna need it.
That is the goal. But listen, we got started. We actually did a lot better than normal. We didn't quite hit our goal of time last time, but we're dealing with and working through. If you caught us last week, the question that we're asking is, especially after the SBC meeting a few weeks ago, is, and we kind of have to time stamp it a little bit. It's the 2021 Southern Baptist Convention meeting that met, and there was a huge, usually something that's a huge snooze fest and kind of something funny to watch that you turn on your computer and leave it in the background just for that one or two big argument moment. It's kind of like watching Chinese Parliament. You're just waiting for somebody, or Russian Parliament. China doesn't have a parliament. They're communists. But all that to say, there was a big issue with sexual abuse this year. And in fact, we talked all about this in our last episode, so you can go back. But granted,
with the convention's response,
yeah, the SBC
the
leadership,
way they've handled it, and or not handled it.
Recap: we turned out that we were, very proud and thankful for the SBC messengers who voted overwhelmingly to have a more focused and I'd say what would be a good word for it?
They wanted transparent investigation into the way it's been handled and how they're going to handle it moving forward. So a couple of motions that were put forward. Jared Wellman put one forward saying, "Hey, we need to investigate the executive committee's handling of this from a third party." Two other pastors, Grant Gaines and Ronnie Parrott, also submitted a very similar resolution, and the executive committee initially rejected all of it, said, no, we're not even going to discuss it. We've hired our own investigation firm, which...
That's like O.J. Simpson hiring his own detective firm to check out his wife.
There's no transparency there,
right.
and you're paying the bills for the company that's doing the investigating. There's some conflict of interest there, and so several pastors put forward motions to say we need somebody who is going to be unbiased and is actually going to look into this thoroughly and without bias, and say, here's where they messed up, here's what they should have done, here's what they didn't do, here's some things that we're going to bring to light that have tried to be buried, which I think there's been quite a bit of that.
Well, because all of this is coming off of the cusp of a huge, we were talking, I think the first time as a kid I ever heard the word masturbation was, I was 11 years old, and it was the Catholic priest scandal that the Boston Globe broke. And, we all thought, oh, well, it must just be those Catholics. And then we find out, 10 or 15 years after that the Houston Chronicle at least found 700. And here's, I don't know, you take the numbers into account that 700 is a lot, 53,000 just Southern Baptist churches. It begins to not look as much, but then we realize that, man, 700 is 700 individual lives and families that have been impacted and broken and
destroyed.
And if we dealt with it and we said, we're going to take care of this and start working on it, that would be one thing. We didn't do that. In fact, it's been a constant culture of cover up and hiding. And that's really what we're going to get into tonight. And you wonder, though, with so many churches, not just SBC, even though it's the biggest Protestant denomination out there. And so when you've got such a large group that's dealing with this, you just kind of assume that, if a whole ocean is salt water, that probably the other oceans on the side have some salt water too. And
that's why we, in last episode and this one, we've chosen to focus on the Southern Baptist Convention. It is kind of the easy target because it's so big and it's so public, and people recognize it and know who it is. Some of our listeners are Southern Baptists, some are not. And we ourselves are not Southern Baptists. But we, I think Ian said last time, both of us owe a debt to the Southern Baptist Convention, whether it was through coming to faith in Christ in a Southern Baptist church or
being trained in seminary.
The Southern Baptist Convention paid for half of my college tuition. So, there is some because I was in a Southern Baptist church when I went to.
You told me you went on
college.
All scholarships. But I would hate to see.
Southern Baptists do is lie, right?
That's true. Oh, that was hard.
I'm going to get to some of that here in just a minute.
But there has
been some of that.
I deeply do. I love and am thankful for Southern Baptists. I wouldn't have a problem serving in a Southern Baptist church and have or not. But it is just one of those things where I would hate to see, and I hate to see the reputation of a denomination that has done so much good be so tarnished by things like this, and it's just heartbreaking. And so how do we fix it? What's actually going? We talked a lot about everything everybody knows about leading up to it, and then we stopped because here we're going to jump into what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, it is heartbreaking because it's stuff that people know better. Than to do this stuff.
But isn't that
is just absolutely
so much of leadership?
Disgusting. What we're seeing the leadership of the Southern Baptist Convention do.
But that's so much of leadership would be fixed, whether it's sexual issues or not. We're apparently underneath a jet right now, but so much would be fixed in leadership in our churches if we just did what we knew was right. And that's where the struggle is. I was thinking about this the other day because we've been in some unhealthy places over the years, mostly unhealthy places, and. I knew that people, you always hear people, they're going to ask you to compromise and try and force you to do this and that. I don't think I was prepared in ministry. The biggest thing I struggled with was being prepared to be asked to compromise my integrity by my pastors on a regular basis. And so,
in order to promote most likely their own platform.
Or not Jesus. And you don't have to compromise.
Make something easier on them it's...
Or just
absolutely
to look back and go, are those bus marks on my back?
Yeah.
And so,
it's very self-serving, and so they use people.
Mm-hmm.
We both experienced that, and know many others who have experienced it even to a worse extent than us. But the way some of these leaders approach this particular issue of sexual abuse. It's just revolting. I mean, and we're going to talk about Ronnie Floyd in a minute and some of the audio clips that were there. Mike Stone was another guy that I know Ronnie. I don't know Mike Stone at all, but everything that all the research I've done into this and looking into who that guy is, one of the latest ones at the convention.
Right.
He had an encounter with a sexual abuse victim who was there advocating for the Southern Baptist Convention to do more. And she was handing out flyers in the lobby, and Hannah Kate Williams was her name. And she had a conversation with Mike Stone, who's a pastor. He was being voted on as the next president. He was the chair of the executive committee and was the main target of Russell Moore's resignation letter, saying this guy has been bullying me, and he is far right wing, ultra conservative, ultra fundamentalist pastor who has promoted this culture of racism and bigotry and all this, and that's why Russell left, was in large part because of this guy. Then in this year he was running for president, but he encountered this woman in the lobby. And instead of saying, so sorry for what has happened to you, how can the Southern Baptist Convention help? If I'm elected president, I promise we're going to get to the bottom of this and we're going to find a solution. Like that would be
think any candidate
that would be the thing that you would
even
say.
If he was lying, you think he'd say that.
Instead, he says you're doing harm to the convention. Like this is your fault, right? Like, and that irritates me to no end because one, it turns it back on the victim and says, no, this is your doing. This is your fault.
Right.
And two, how pathetically small-minded do you have to be to say...
Well, he's Southern Baptist, so be careful.
That because there is a disagreement that it's doing harm to the convention.
Well, but then
you guys can disagree. That's fine, but and that's part of the problem.
We're going to answer the question. We buried the lead a little bit, but we're gonna answer that question of why that's an issue. But I mean, it makes me wonder too. You've got the CBN, which is like the He-Man Woman Haters Club. Not being political or anything. I'm just saying they're like this little club of people who just, I don't know what they're compensating for. You can think about that. But they're this group of guys you've got Paige Patterson, who I really enjoyed Paige Patterson back in the day and listening to him talk and speak, and a lot of people did. And he helped lead the conservative resurgence, which helped talk about the inerrancy of Scripture. And then we find out through the Houston Chronicle that it's not an issue that, again, like we said, it's not that there is sexual abuse. That can be dealt with. It can be dealt with correctly. We can put safeguards in place. And I don't think you can 100% fix human nature because, I mean, there's brokenness and sin, but you can put in systems and then just essentially just deal with it when it happens.
Right.
But then you find out that Paige Patterson and a group of guys, it wasn't that they didn't deal with it. They had a pastor who was apparently the up-and-coming star of the SBC. I don't know, it's about being the world's tallest midget. But all that to say...
Also not politically correct. Okay.
I don't roll that way. But all that to say, they not just one time that they covered for him and helped him go somewhere, 2 times. And then at one point he went to prison for what he did. And then he came out and then they placed him in a 3rd church. And he had sexual victims at every church. And then he withheld tapes and information because he had conversations about it from the DA, which was an obstruction of justice because apparently it didn't give anything they didn't have. But what a slimy and sneaky thing to do. And it's one of those things where I think that at the end of the day, it makes me wonder of the integrity of the CBN and whether it's Brad Jerkovich or Paige Patterson or any of these guys that are leading this so loudly and doing their little thing. They're all backing Mike Stone and these guys, and I don't understand that. But all that to say, go ahead.
And we'll get into this when we look at some
which
of
we've been saying that
reasons,
we will.
But it just part of what bothers me about it all so much. And you look at guys like Paige Patterson and Paul Pressler and those guys that were involved in the
Pressler, that's who it was.
Conservative research. Yeah, Paul Pressler was a judge who was deeply involved in the Southern Baptist Convention. Who turns out he'd been molesting little boys.
Right.
And so it just, they are so hell-bent on preserving some doctrine in the name of theology, in the name of we're going to preserve. And that's what the CBN...
that's Christian Baptist Network, not to be confused with a Conservative Baptist Network, Christian Baptist Network. Those are 2 different things.
Conservative Baptist Network.
I think they just wanted to get more hits on Google.
First of all, it strikes me as funny that this organization was created because they didn't think the Southern Baptist Convention was conservative enough.
Well, no. The funny thing was Michael, you got to understand. They founded this thing for all of the problems the SBC isn't having. Like saying that they posted, they pretend like they went in a time machine, like they hit 88 miles an hour.
When this baby hits 88 miles per hour.
And went, oh no, inerrancy of Scripture. And they tried to relive Patterson's glory days. You got a small-minded guy leading it anyway who is just a whiny little guy that doesn't get enough attention. And so they've made it all about, they said, we're all about the inerrancy of Scripture. Well, I don't know if you can get more inerrant than J.D. Greer.
Yeah, the Southern Baptist Convention has not had an issue with that.
They're anti, and I'm not pro or anti-Calvinist on any of it, but they're all the anti-Calvinist guys, so it's just really funny to see them all go, you're like, dude, Calvinists have a lot of problems, but one of them is not believing that Scripture is authoritative. So they just launched this whole thing.
Yeah, so that's like, but that's what we see. It's almost like in order to cover up the real issues,
right?
The serious things that we ought to be dealing with that are hard to deal with, that are difficult, that may not reflect well on our own leadership. We just redirect and we wave the banner over here like, hey, this is the problem. We need to work on. Well, it's almost never the problem.
And that's why. So if you've ever been at a church, and I mean, I've been at a church where my head pastor had affairs, and I don't even know if to this day most of the people that were at that church knew he had affairs. They just knew he had a moral failing. But it wasn't sexual abuse. But the thing was, for years it went on because of that exact mentality. He would throw smoke screens on the staff and with people, and eventually we found out, none of these problems really existed, and all of us have been struggling here because you just wanted to get it off with other people. And that's what it turned into.
So it is kind of all a game of smoke and mirrors, right?
So where are we at now?
We want to. We have there has been some recordings that kind of get behind the smoke and mirrors and to look behind the scenes and see what's actually taking place. And these clips are, to give you the context of it, these are from the time of this recording. They're about a year ago, roughly. They are private meetings between a couple of the key leaders in the Southern Baptist Convention.
Right.
The executive committee president, who is kind of, as we said last time, is kind of the head honcho.
He's the Don
of the entire Southern Baptist Convention. His name is Ronnie Floyd, and that's his role. Now, he was a pastor in Arkansas for many years. I worked with Ronnie, worked for Ronnie.
I grew up in his church.
So we know Ronnie very well, and this is a clip. These are some clips between him and Russell Moore, who is the president of the executive or of the Ethics and Religious Liberties Commission, and someone else who was in this, Mike Stone, I believe, was in these meetings. Yeah, and Philip Bethencourt.
Yes.
Who was actually the one who released these. He's a pastor in College Station, Texas. Now
In fact, we had that link last time.
Russell's right-hand man. Hopefully you listened to that if you listened to the last episode. But we want to play a couple of these clips and then just kind of talk through our understanding, our synopsis of what's taking place, and kind of answer that question that we've teased out 5 or 6 times now of why is this happening?
It's a big thing that you got to wade through. And
so let's jump into this. And so the first clip you're going to hear is Ronnie.
Yes. And we asked the question, why is this happening? We'll answer these questions as we go through these clips. But this is in response, we talked last time, so I won't go into it, but in response to a conference that Russell Moore ran where he interviewed a woman who had been through sexual abuse, and he was asking her the question on what's the SBC doing wrong? What can we do better? And she pretty much just said, you're doing terrible. And so anyway, this is their response to those meetings. And so let's ask the question, why we can answer pretty much why this is happening.
Here's what I mean, it's another reason I wanted to be with y'all. Because, what y'all get is not what I always get.
Right.
Obviously. And you're not surprised by that.
Right.
But how are we supposed to respond in your minds to people who would say, why in the world would we have a conference and let people degrade the Southern Baptist Convention, attack its leadership, our churches, and all those things? And how are we supposed to do that? And we let them say what they want to say.
Yeah.
All right. So that was Ronnie. The yeahs or the acknowledgments in there was Russell Moore. And so this is Ronnie directing a conversation at Russell Moore for allowing Rachel Denhollander to come speak at the conference. I
never say her last name right.
And here's the thing with this. The first thing I would say about why this is happening, Ronnie is a perfect example of this. We have exchanged transparency and humility for posturing and for platforming.
Yeah, 100%.
And we are just, Ronnie is so concerned, and I know this because I worked closely with Ronnie for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And saw his ministry in Arkansas for a couple decades now. Yeah. Ronnie is the kind of guy that buys hook, line, and sinker into this idea that you don't ever allow leadership to be criticized.
Right.
It has to be protected. It has to be in a bubble. You don't ever bring anybody in that has a disposing view or a disagreeing view of you.
You were closer on a staff level, but a lot of churches interpret that as we have to protect the pastor's feelings and insulate him. And if your pastor doesn't have the balls to lead and to hear a little bit of criticism, then he probably needs to go work at McDonald's. I'm just throwing it out there because that's asinine. It's just ridiculous.
And that's been Ronnie's MO for forever. Has been, you don't criticize me, and that's been, and he's got his people kind of in that church indoctrinated with that I am God's man. You don't question anything I say. I am the supreme authority here.
He's anointed.
And that's exactly right. He's anointed, and so he's God's man, and so whatever he says goes.
Right.
And if you dare to criticize that, you're not disagreeing with Ronnie Floyd. You're disagreeing with God himself.
Well, and here the rhetoric, though, in that clip is the statement was, why would we allow? So after you got somebody who's exposing, I mean, and again, this is very similar to the brief year that David had when he slept with Bathsheba, had an affair, killed Uriah. I mean, this is not just a season for these guys. This is a lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And you got this what should be a Nathan moment where he comes up and says, tells them the whole story about the sheep and goes, that's you. And he calls them out. And so it's a grace that this woman would speak into that, and even Ronnie would have an opportunity, and the SBC leadership would have an opportunity to say, you know what, we really screwed up, and we're gonna fix this.
Like that should be.
But the statement is, why would we allow people to degrade the SBC, attack its leadership, attack its churches? Now, granted, that's the only time you hear church in that statement. Yeah. It's all SBC, nothing to do with Jesus, nothing to do with the actual church, Big C church, and nothing to do with victims or anybody else. It's all about this organization of bloated fat dudes who all just sit around and talk about how they need to preserve their power or keep things going, or what doesn't matter, right?
Well, and if they
I'm not bitter, I'm just honest.
No, I mean,
that's just true.
Genuinely, there's no bitterness in this.
Yeah, it's just the case.
It's something that needs to be addressed, and that's been one of my problems with some of the churches Southern Baptist churches that I've been a part of. Yeah. Is they view any disagreement as an attack.
Right.
And that's all this was. Rachel's conversation, her interview with Russell, was not an attack on the SBC. It was pointing out areas that the SBC has failed and needs to get better. Yeah. And that should have been Ronnie's response was, hey, Russell, thank you for bringing another perspective into this. We're gonna do better. We're gonna take her advice under consideration. Here's our action steps. What do you think we ought to do about this? Yeah, right.
You could have been like, hey, thanks for giving us the opportunity to deal with this.
But instead, it's a slap on the wrist to Russell, because how dare he let someone attack the Southern Baptist Convention?
Yeah.
It's so unfair to Russell in what took place here. But let's keep going with it.
And yet, the whole entire sexual abuse study is funded by the executive committee. Mm-hmm.
All right, so real quick, there is the key. That is the heart of this issue for Ronnie Floyd.
It doesn't get dirtier than that. We paid for it.
Yes, it is about money. Ronnie is consumed by this idea of one, protecting his own platform and making sure he's on top of everything, and two, where's the money coming from? And money has strings. And if Ronnie is paying for something, it has to happen the way he wants it to happen. All right.
Regardless of the wreck, and there was a wreck. There's been a wreck since February or beyond, and maybe the wreck became exposed.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Maybe that'd be the better way to say it.
Maybe the wreck became exposed. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Say it. But how am I supposed to respond to that? I mean,
because we're not in a criminal conspiracy to cover up what happened.
Because I mean, they really hold y'all accountable.
Sure, of course
they hold y'all accountable. They say, why would they not put parameters on what they say?
Because if we had, what you would end up with right now is 3 days of Washington Post stories and New York Times stories about the parameters that we put on people, so that the charge would be only the people who were willing to come in and participate in the cover-up were allowed to be there.
So, great statement. And the ending of that conversation, I think, is big. Here's why is this happening? I think that end of that first clip is, in fact, that's the longest clip I think that we've got. But at 1:38, he talks about restricting, Ronnie's saying, well, we're going to restrict the words of speakers so you can have somebody. How awful to have somebody like Rachel Denhollander come up, share her story, but before she comes up on stage, go, by the way, you can't address these things. I mean, that's just asinine. I'm going to put a definition of that word at the bottom just so you get it, because we'll use it a lot. But I think that why this happens is because the SBC leadership, not the messengers, but the leadership is more concerned with preserving and expanding power rather than truth or justice for the broken. And I mean, you look at this culture. We've seen this culture in the political world and the sexual world. We tend to not be people who stand in the middle. We tend to be metronomes, right? And what I don't understand is the idea of why people don't dive into this. Because at the end of the day, if people are wrongly accused, then you're going to set them free if you dive in and do it and you investigate and you take care of it. And that's what scares me as a pastor oftentimes is you've got to constantly be watching yourself in case that happens. But then on the other side, which is the much more likely side, you're going to be bringing closure and healing to victims who are broken. And I mean, I love how Russell Moore said it, and it's the way that we should say it, right? Is Russell Moore says, well, we're not in some kind of criminal conspiracy here. Although now they kind of are in a criminal conspiracy.
Well. How the turntables...
But Ronnie's question was, how should I respond to this?
Yeah.
Like, what story do I need to come up with? What wording do I need to use to appease everybody? And Russell's like, this isn't a criminal conspiracy.
Just say it.
Right? Like, we're not in an episode of House of Cards. We're not trying to...
Well, maybe we are.
Maybe we are, actually.
It's Kevin Spacey in the SBC leadership now.
Yeah.
But question, here's when he's at the very end, when he's talking about what the New York Times and New York Post would run. Explain to me, because I get blurry on that. Explain to me what he's saying.
I think what Russell is saying, he's responding to Ronnie's request for a company line.
Gotcha.
And he's saying this isn't about a company line and about trying to bury this and trying to make it all go away. We do that, and the New York Times is going to find out.
Run all those.
The Washington Post is going to find out, and they're going to bury us.
Well,
instead, it needs to be, we need to come out and show truth and explain, here's the situation, here's what's going on. But Ronnie doesn't care about that. Ronnie's concern here is blame shifting. No, they're going to hold you accountable. They're going to hold the ERLC and Russell Moore personally responsible for having this woman come on.
But imagine how much healthier it could have been to say, all right, how are we going to explain the truth and how are we going to make this clear to people and let them know what we're doing? But no, it's, but I remember even at that church in Arkansas growing up where there were discretionary thing or, there were small scandals and issues that would go on. And even as a volunteer who was kind of deeply involved, you'd hear the statement, this is what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say. And I know, you've got to do some of that to an extent. But it was always this really vague whatever. And I felt like we worked for the President of the United States more than we did anything else. But clip 2. Let's go. You want to go to clip 2?
Yeah, let's go to clip 2.
I mean, what do I say, for example, when and it's going to come. And I've already heard from at least one, and I know there will be more. What do I say to the executive committee when Rachel's come after them? And all. What am I supposed to say to that?
I would say two things is we didn't script anybody in terms of what they can say or not say. We wanted to hear from everybody's heart without a muzzle put on them in terms of what they had to say. And so that's part of it that's there. And number 2, I would say, let's not do stupid stuff again.
That's a pretty good line.
Yeah,
you want to lie.
So I think Russell is spot on with this. And so again, Ronnie I think this is just following the last clip we just heard.
Sure.
Ronnie is still on this mantra of what am I supposed to say? How am I supposed to instruct the other leadership to respond to this? Yeah. And here's why this is a good example of why we are in this situation. Because we refuse to address the ugly truth of our reality, and instead we want to cover it up with pretty sound bites.
Right.
Like that's what Ronnie is attempting to accomplish here. Is say, listen, I need to tell people what to say so that it makes us look good, so that it looks like everything is okay. Yeah. And Russell's response is, no, like we're not muzzling the ox. We're not telling people what they can and cannot say. Yeah. We want to investigate this. We want to find the truth of it all. Yeah. And 2, and this is the really, really important one, Southern Baptists, stop doing stupid stuff.
Don't be stupid.
I love that line. It's true.
That's brilliant. What a novel concept, right? Like if we would just stop being stupid, this kind of stuff wouldn't happen. If we would address these issues when they come up and stop trying to bury it and make ourselves look good in the middle of it, things would be so much better.
I think a contributing problem that all this, and maybe this is a little bit too meta and too contrived. But I think that at the end of the day, part of this is the outcropping of consumer-based church, right? Because it has been so pushed that everything has to be palatable and cute and great and not messy and encouraging all the time, that we've built such a system that you get 40 or 50 years later, and now the system, it's all about protect the system. We don't want to talk about anything that's going on here. We're blah, 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 and we go to rather than dealing with difficult truth and being that's the whole point of the gospel, is we meet the difficult things and we move through them and we talk about them and we deal with them. And I think that it blows my mind that this is where we're at as the only entity in the world that has the answer to this stuff.
Yeah.
Clip 3.
And I'm not scared by anything the survivors would say. Okay, I'm not worried about that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking the base. How can we? I just want to preserve the base, and that's what I would say to y'all. As you think through the strategy, do everything you can to remember the base.
Well, what I would say to you is we don't have one base.
I agree with
We
that
have
totally.
several
Coach.
bases.
I do too.
So that's going to
I know it's crazy. It's shaky ground.
And I would
The
also
old
add,
SBC does not. The old SBC does not.
That's
exist.
right. That's right.
I would add, when it comes to the base, we may have differing opinions on specific instances of what happened at the conference destabilizing the base. What I would say is having the ERLC actually make a concerted effort on abuse is one of our best hopes for preserving a base for long term, because it's going to help to protect the credibility of the convention. And even if it has some unintended consequences in the short term, the ability to preserve the credibility is going to be what makes there even be a base there in the future.
Yeah. And the attitude of, even giving the attitude, we're here to tell you how great the SBC bureaucracy and the megachurch pastors are, is not only is the wrong thing to do, but is a recipe for destroying the denomination's credibility and the SBC bureaucracy and the megachurch pastors.
That is a huge statement. Largely because, one, how awful is it to say we're going to protect the base and not protect people that have been victimized and broken by the base, right? That is such a worldly and just asinine response.
I am almost speechless at that. It does not surprise me.
No, not at all.
Because that's like I said, that's Ronnie's MO. That's how he operates. So It doesn't surprise me that he would make that statement. And the reason Philip released this clip is because that's not the statement that Ronnie makes publicly.
Right.
And Philip's like, I don't want to be a whistleblower, but I know the truth, and what you're saying publicly, Ronnie, is not what you have said to us privately.
And if you need more context, click the link below. It's got the letter where all these clips are found, and there's even more clips. Yeah. We're highlighting the big ones. But
to say I'm not worried about anything that the victims can say, I'm thinking about the base, is just unbelievable.
That's unconscionable.
That you would make that statement. Now, I know Ronnie has issued a statement and said something to the effect of these clips are an attempt to mischaracterize what was taking place here. I don't buy that for a second. This is 100% the problem with the Southern Baptist Convention, is that we are focused on protecting the base rather than hearing what's actually being said and doing something about it.
Right.
And that is our problem, and that's been the problem throughout Ronnie's ministry and working with Ronnie, and being told you have to dress a certain way because that's what appeals to the wealthy in our church, and that's what's going to make them give money and support this church and pay their salaries, and you got to do this, and it's always been about preserving the base.
I remember that we would take people. Even this idea though. So I want to pull this out of James, but even in the book of James, I remember growing up in this church where, even Ronnie Floyd, and then I would see other people that had served with him do this in other churches I served at as well. I will say, for whatever reason, there's a lot of guys running a lot of things that came through Cross Church, Northwest Arkansas, that have gone on, and I was one of them that got to go to different positions, and I would watch. It's the same mentality. I would watch them do giving events for the top 100 givers in the church. and they would pull them together and they'd have a big dinner with them and then challenge them to give more. And I remember thinking, even as a middle schooler, reading the book of James, where James says, hey, you don't give preferential treatment to the guy that comes in with a gold ring because you think it could be advantageous for you, and then let the other guy who's poor sit on the floor. And the last church that I was at, I mean, you would walk in and the first 4 rows across the auditorium would be reserved, and not like guest speaker reserved where it needs to be up front, but for mayors and for these guys and these guys. I mean, they would just lay out all of these people so that the more powerful you were, you got to be up front. And this is that mentality, is that it's a huge violation of James. Why do the poor get trodden on? And I think that this is crazy to me. James even makes that point in his epistle. He says, these same men that are dragging you to court, beating you up, the same people that are causing the problems, you're protecting them as if they're going to save you. And this is where we're at the expense of people who are being molested, people who are being raped, pastors who are just leading, are doing what Paul would say and abusing women and causing problems, even if it's not rape or anything like that, but in sexual immorality. I mean, all of this is happening, and the response is not, let's get to the bottom of this and take care of the people Jesus was most concerned about.
Yeah.
It's, no, let's go to all the people that are causing the problems, get our story straight, and then we'll be okay, because they'll take care of us.
Because they have the money.
Yeah. And no, they screwed you over in the first place. Why would you protect them?
Yep.
It's just
absolutely.
So now we got to talk about, I mean, this is brief, but we got to talk about how we respond. We may even need to do next episode about this, but a couple quick points. How do we respond? Here's some takeaways. I think the first one is going to be, 1, speak up about sexual abuse. We had a pastor who's going to come on at one point and tell the whole story of how this played out at his church, and he paid the price for it.
Yeah.
But he had a whole group of people who wanted to, all of his deacons, all of his leadership, wanted to hide a pastor who for decades had been sexually abusing people, and people started coming out after he had the healthy response and wasn't even talking about sexual stuff. He just said, I want us to have candor, be honest, whatever. And somehow this just terrible person had suppressed this truth that was known by the staff for so long. And the response was, we're going to character assassinate you and kick you out because you want a third party to come in and investigate it to find healing.
Well,
so we got to speak up about sexual abuse.
We got to speak up about it. And we got to recognize that when we do, there most likely will be
resistance,
bad consequences.
Absolutely.
Right? Like if you are not going to attack, using their words, you're not going to attack, this hidden power source.
Which is funny because the only thing you're attacking is the enemy. So let's just be honest. This is a Beelzebub
without them responding in some way, and that's kind of the next how we respond is we have to be in speaking up. We have to be more concerned about justice in our own empire, and the pastor you're talking about did exactly that, and that's incredibly honorable and virtuous that he would do that. That he would sacrifice his own career, his own job, for the sake of justice and truth prevailing. Taking care
of people.
But that's how we have to respond. We have to acknowledge that it's there and not try and bury it. We need to speak up about it and I think be mandatory reporters and all that kind of stuff. And we have to recognize that there's going to be unfavorable consequences for you. And
if that's not a policy in your church and you're a pastor, or you're a layperson and you don't see that policy in your church, that's a shame on you and your church situation. You need to set it up.
Yeah.
I mean, any ministry I've ever served at, especially in student ministry, it's a mandated report, which is just legal. Sad that the world is beating us on this. But there should always be mandated reporters because sexual sin is something you don't mess around. You don't mess around with any sin, but especially that. I think the other thing, and this is what I think that there is a glimmer of hope and light in this, and more than a glimmer, when you see the SBC churches and pastors or bivocational pastors, whoever it is, the messengers who are there, vote overwhelmingly that we need some third-party help here because these guys are not doing a good job and we need to get to the bottom of this. But you need to ask denominational leaders or your church leaders. Sometimes churches are so big, they are denominations. But we are squeaky wheels about everything from I want to go to baseball tournaments and not go to this, and I want to do this, and I want to do that. I mean, we find so many reasons that are ridiculous. Be a squeaky wheel about wondering and asking what steps are being taken to either protect victims or prevent victims from being protect victims when they are victims, but prevent them from becoming them in the first place, right?
Yeah. So I mean,
what are your policies?
If you are a Southern Baptist, you don't have a hierarchy structure in the organization. I mean, you have your associational missionary. So the Southern Baptist Convention has little pockets of networks,
messengers and missionaries.
But you have each individual area has a group. So like we live in the Tulsa area. There's the Tulsa Metro Baptist Association. It's a local association of Southern Baptist churches, and there's a missionary that is his job is to help be there for pastors in each of these churches that are in that area. That's somebody you can ask what steps are being taken. You can contact the entire executive committee. You can contact Ross
They would
Floyd's
love
office
that. They want that every day.
What is being done? I want to know. I want details on what's taking place, on how we are preventing this stuff from happening in the future. And then the last response that we want to suggest to you guys is huge. And it's this. Don't just leave the church altogether because you see this happening in some churches.
I know that it's tempting from two guys who've been just kicked around and beat up in multiple places by the church. It is the easier thing to walk away, but if you're outraged by it, you know that the easy thing to do is not the right thing to do. Yeah. And you need to stay and fight for, I would tell you, find a healthy church, but you need to become advocates, not for just trying to destroy the church or trying to discredit everybody. You need to become an advocate for victims and an advocate for, because this is not what we're talking about. It's not what the church is. No. It's not what the church was designed to be. And we need to take steps and have more believers, not pastors only, but believers fighting for the church that Jesus died for.
And on those same lines, I think it's important that we remember that the church, capital C, the bride of Christ, is bigger, way bigger than any one denomination.
Absolutely.
And so if you are as repulsed as we are by what you see the Southern Baptist leadership doing, and you feel like I can no longer be a part of a Southern Baptist church, that's fine, right? I don't have any issue with that at all. I don't want you to just leave the church altogether and say, I don't want anything to do with that at all because of what this one group of leaders has
be responsive
done or
to decision rather than just reactionary. I think that one of the reasons I think it is so hopeful is that the odds are you're in a church that wants to see some justice. This is the majority of churches, because you know about mega churches, that's a very tiny percentage of churches, these master, but a smaller church. The odds are you are with a group of people that want justice too. And that was kind of Russell's last comment in that final clip.
Because that has been before some of these bigger issues. Ian said the Southern Baptist Convention is typically a snore fest.
That's true.
And this is the big argument that they've had for the last 8 or 10 years has been mega churches versus little churches. And the Southern Baptist Convention has celebrated these mega churches and these mega church pastors. And I think that's kind of what Russell is getting at. It's like the continuing with the mantra, while all this stuff is going on, we're celebrating these great big churches. Yeah. And Russell is saying, guys, continuing with that line of mega churches are great and they're going to save the convention. There's no point to that.
Well,
we need to be speaking up about sexual abuse. We need to be more concerned about justice for the victims than we are about preserving our empire. We need to be asking the good questions of the leadership. What are we doing to prevent this stuff from happening in the future, and to do what we can for those victims. And we need to be fighting this. Yeah. We don't need to be burying it and covering it up and involving ourselves, creating a criminal conspiracy, because as soon as you start covering up, it becomes a criminal conspiracy. And let's not do that.
I get why people want to cover it up, because it's incredibly difficult to walk through, but that doesn't mean that we do that. And that's never benefited anybody to do that, at least not long term.
Right.
And so I think that, I think the better question maybe too, at the end of this is saying, what are we communicating to our people and just to the church in general if we don't respond to this in this way. And I think the thing is that we're more willing to bury the sinful things in us rather than expose the sin in us and find healing in that. Mm-hmm. And that it's more important to keep up appearances than to do what is right and to be righteous. I mean, that's, the word righteous gets used in wrong contexts and used in different things. But I mean, literally to be right, to live a life that is right, and rightness is to be a righteous person. And I personally want a church that is more focused on righteousness than on appearances, mainly because Jesus was. And so this is a long podcast, but a good podcast. And so we hope that if you've got questions, I hope that you'll share this, because we need as many people as possible to see this and wrestle with this. There's probably a massive amount of people who just don't even know about any of it. And I get it. We're on information overload all day long. And so this stuff gets lost. I saw something the other day where it wasn't even about the church, but somebody threw a really important story at the end of the news cycle and nobody knew about it. I was like, this is kind of important. So listen, share this. Please subscribe to us. We care about a healthy church, about healthy pastors, and healthy pastoral families, which is just a rarity, and which is crazy, because when that becomes something that happens, there ought not be pastors anymore. So we need a healthy church and healthy pastors, and it only happens with you. And so we love you guys. Please subscribe and share. Michael, any closing thoughts?
And go be right. Go do the right thing, and
not just in sexual abuse, but everywhere.
Everywhere. But particularly with the sexual abuse stuff, do what's right, and negative consequences on yourself be damned. Right? Like let's do what is right, and let's care for people. Let's love people. Let's protect the vulnerable, and let's bring light to darkness and uncover the nasty, dirty sins that are plaguing our churches and our ministries. So go do it. We love you guys, and we will talk to you next time.
In the words of my coffee cup, I love Jesus, but I cuss a little. So may your ministry be healthy and your coffee stay hot. We're the Mad Pastors.
Thank you for listening to the Mad Pastors Podcast. Mad Pastors is powered by G6 Allies, who knows that healthy ministry means having the right team behind you to provide worthwhile tools so ministry doesn't destroy you. If you'd like to partner with G6 Allies, here's a couple of ways you can do it. 1, you can rate, subscribe, and review this podcast so that as many people as possible can get the same help and encouragement that you're receiving. You can also visit g6allies.com/partner to see how you can financially partner with us. G6 Allies is dependent on viewers and listeners like you to support our ministry across the nation. If you have any questions or would like to contact the Mad Pastors for any reason, you can contact us at hello@g6allies.com. We'd love to hear from you.